Alright, you all know the drill at this point. Here's what this series is about, here are the rules, and watch Leif's videos if you want more details. We start the episode with the aftermath of the battle from last episode. Arondir is going about checking the wounded, and it is here that he first meets Bronwyn, who is still taking care of the nobleman whom she saved last episode during the battle. We find out that his name is Gath, while Arondir asks Bronwyn why she endangered herself during an orc raid. She states simply that those who cannot fight may still have much to add to a battle. Arondir considers this for a moment, noting that in his experience those who cannot fight will often hinder a battle effort as much as help it. Bronwyn stands from her work and says simply that she has hindered no battle effort in her time as a healer in the field, and she doubts that will begin anytime soon. Gath speaks in her defense as well, saying that if anything, she has saved at least 20 men in the past day, and he doubts whether their battle was made any worse by her presence. Arondir then nods, saying he may have to consider such an asset in the future. Arondir and the stranger then meet and begin to discuss the battle. Arondir mentions how the orcs have been coming down from Ethel Duath more frequently recently, but they would usually only attack the outer villages, which is where most of his elves are stationed. The stranger does not say much throughout this conversation, as he is deep in thought, but he does ask Arondir a few questions about the general movements of the orcs. Arondir notes that they have been largely repelled for several years now this far west. However, he notices the troubled look on his acquaintance's face and realizes what he's thinking. You believe they know of your errand? It is possible, the stranger says. And if this is the first time they've been so bold, they may very well have come specifically for me. Arondir's face becomes incredibly serious, akin to Ishmael's acting face. What, then, do you propose? If my guess is true, then I must leave immediately. Are you sure that there is no direct route north? North? Marigold says as she walks over to the two elves. Well, if he's going north, then there's no problem, Mr. Commander. I'll be able to get the pretty elf there in no time. Both Arondir and the stranger look at Marigold with a mixture of confusion and amusement, though Arondir's is swiftly replaced by exasperation. Marigold, please don't speak to my guests that way. Think nothing of it, my friend, the stranger says to Arondir. He then turns to Marigold. I am thankful for your offer, little one, but even from what little I have gathered in my time here, there are dangers in the way where I must go, and it seems as though something is not quite right about all of this. But I was the one who warned you people about the orc attack in the first place. You'd be dead if it weren't for me and my cousins. The stranger chuckles as he turns to Arondir. She has a point, you know, which causes Arondir to frown and roll his eyes, going to check on his soldiers. The stranger continues, You have a stout heart, little one, but I am afraid I cannot take you north with me. If something should befall you, then I shall count myself responsible. You just don't get it, do ya? Us Harfoots are going that way as well, so you can come with us. That orc attack was the straw that broke the carriage floor, and Granny says it's time to go at this point, and I can't help but agree with her. Which reminds me, Arondir, she shouts in the commander's direction. Granny says you should probably get going as well, and I'd listen to her if I were you. She hasn't been around forever like you elves, but she sees things, you know? Arondir raises an eyebrow as he reapproaches. She told you to give me this advice? Yep. Arondir pauses for a moment before surprisingly nodding. Then I will take her advice. He then once more excuses himself, leaving Marigold and the stranger there alone. Well, she demands of him. The stranger sighs. Very well. I suppose if you are going the same way, it will not hurt if I accompany you. Though he begins to frown as he says this. We then cut to Elrond talking to Celebrimbor, Galadriel, and Verrix about the gradual corruption of the world. Galadriel remains silent throughout the conversation, subtly watching Verrix, who frequently looks to the misty mountains looming in the east. Celebrimbor speaks most throughout the conversation, mentioning that he is honored by the fact that both the Herald of Valinor as well as Gil-galad believe those skilled in the crafts of Alay will know best how to deal with this corruption, which he admits was something he had begun to notice as well. The two begin discussing the crafts of the elven smiths at Eregion, and Celebrimbor mentions in passing how they have begun the forging of rings, scepters, crowns, and swords of lesser quality than those of Gondolin or Nargothrond in Beleriand, but still of great power nonetheless. Galadriel and Verrix are both looking towards the mountains, though it appears to be for different reasons, as Verrix frowns while Galadriel smiles. It is then that Galadriel recommends that they turn east from there and meet their friends in Moria. Celebrimbor frowns at the idea, but acquiesces, and the group turns towards the mountains. As they approach, we get a sense of the scale of both Eregion and the Misty Mountains, with elvish towns seen in the distance and the beginnings of roads connecting the various parts of the realm, all while the mountains stretch high into the clouds, growing larger with each shot until the mountain wall soars to their left along the path. They then approach a group of about 5 elves and 12 dwarves, all working on a great door going right into the mountain. It is here that we are at last introduced to Celebrimbor, who is a young and virile-looking elven smith, much younger looking than both Galadriel and Celeborn, though slightly more aged than Elrond. He is diligently using a strange device to write a message of greeting upon the Dwarvish door, while a dwarf next to him is doing much the same in runes. Before they can finish, however, they are interrupted by the announcement of Galadriel and Celeborn's arrival. The dwarf, looking with Celebrimbor, immediately departs from his work and is the first to greet the visitors, introducing himself as the Dwarvish Prince Narvi, a great friend of Celebrimbor and of Eregion. Galadriel smiles and thanks Narvi for his courtesy, as Celebrimbor arrives and greets his king and queen. The dwarves likewise show their thanks and admiration for the great realm of Eregion and its leaders, before Celebrimbor mentions that they will have to end their work for the day. Verrix notes how impressed he is with the doorway, stepping forward to examine it and realizing that the inscription in form of the doorway is made with a metal. Narvi is filled with pride as he explains that the inscription is made with mithril, the true glory of Khazad-dûm. Celebrimbor mentions how the metal is the true cause of the mutual success of their realms, drawing out a single ingot of it and extolling its qualities. Verrix steps back from the door and says that he has never seen any work quite like it, prompting the dwarves to say that it is almost finished, and a great beauty it will be when it is. Celebrimbor agrees, saying that he and his friends will soon experience the bane of all craftsmen in seeing their work finished, while also suffering the displeasure of knowing that they shall never work on it again. Narvi comforts him by saying that they will, no doubt, find a new great work to occupy them when it is finished, and Celebrimbor agrees. The two then say Namarie to each other. The elves and men with Verrix return to the road while Celebrimbor speaks with Galadriel and Celeborn, with Celeborn praising Celebrimbor for his dealing with the dwarves and the procuring of mithril. Indeed, Celebrimbor says, there's been much fruit from this friendship of elves and dwarves, but if you'll forgive so presumptuous a question, my king, I believe I felt a coldness in your courtesy towards the dwarves. Have my friends done anything to offend you? They've done nothing, Celebrimbor, Galadriel interjects. My husband's coldness is no fault of theirs. Celeborn sighs. She is right, my dear smith. Your friends have done me no wrong. My apologies, lord. I should not have assumed any offense from your expression. I did not say that either. Celeborn shakes his head. You must understand, I bear no ill will towards our friends in Khazad-dûm, but the rune of Doriath will always be fresh in my mind when I look upon their kind. Celeborn bows his head, remembering the event, while Galadriel's face looks pained, though whether this is due to sympathy for her husband or agitation that he has not let the sins of the past die is hard to discern. In either case, they make their way towards a large city, which we can even learn by on-screen text is Ostendethil. In our next shot, we see the stranger and Marigold returning to the Harfoot village, which is now in a complete state of packing in preparation for the migration north. Marigold runs to her family and introduces the stranger. Hey Mom, Dad, Ruby, this is the shiny elf I was telling you all about. Rondell looks at the stranger with an expression that can only be described as confused admiration, whereas Ruby looks at the golden-haired elf with the dumbfounded wonder a child has when seeing a sky full of stars. He is shiny, she says. Rondell gets a hold of himself and apologizes to the stranger for his stupefaction. It's clear that the stranger doesn't understand the words, but understands the meaning nonetheless, and bows his head slightly in recognition. Marigold speaks to him in Elvish and introduces her father and sister and mentions that her mother's name is Amber. Now that I think of it, I'm not sure I've ever asked you your name, and Mr. Arendir didn't tell me about it either. You're pretty secretive for an elf, you know. Who am I kidding? All you elves are secretive. They say that if you ask an elf a question, they'll spend their entire time talking around it without getting you one step closer to what you wanted to know in the first place. Do they? The stranger laughed. Well, I would say that the elves are wise to keep secrets, especially from those who could be hurt by the truths they hide. Well, Granny always told me that lying is a bad thing. It's really hard to trust a liar. Indeed, but I doubt most elves you have met have ever told you something untrue. But we are by nature cunning with our words, for they are a gift, not one to be used lightly. I only understood half of that. But anyway, what can I call you? Saying Mr. Pretty Elf will get old real fast. I couldn't agree more, the stranger says, attempting to speak with smaller words. I suppose if I am already entrusting my mission to you, it will not hurt to entrust my name as well. You may call me Glorfindel while our friendship lasts. We then cut to Eregion, who is back in the tower, as a group of decently dressed men with scribes and guards approach the building. The elves greet them and welcome them inside. Eregion announces what his scouts have been reporting for many months now. The orcs are gathering towards the east and have been for some time. Their raids display the confidence that any of the elves in the area have yet to see from individual hunting bands. These last ones even had the audacity to attack the city directly while a battle raged. Are we not sure that this is merely an unfortunate coincidence? Asked one of the noblemen. Called Son of Hote, Gath says, I am afraid this is impossible. The orcs went past the eastern river and launched a coordinated attack. They meant to catch these elves out of position while we were kept inside the town. It is unreasonable to believe this was anything other than a plan by a higher mind. Arondir nods. The orcs have a leader. No doubt with enough investigation I can discover who and what that leader is. Indeed, he did not seem shy showing himself during the battle, though he has disappeared since then. Clearly, he finds you easy to evade, one of the noblemen remarks. Arondir's face shows no acknowledgement to the insult. If you would like to send scouts of your own, then by all means do so. Make no mistake, I wish to have this thing found and executed for the danger it poses to us. What are we waiting for, Cult says. Let us gather the search parties and begin to move east. I am afraid that's also not an option, Gath says. Shortly after the battle, we learned that there was a third orcish party which has gone about and burned our fields. My lands will have no harvest this year, and as of yet, we've been unable to track down that group of orcs. They were last spotted crossing the river and looked to be moving north. This is outrageous, one of the noblemen from earlier remarks. Why do we trust you elves to protect us if you can't even perform your basic functions? I will remind you, my friend, Arondir says, that we are under no obligation to defend you from anything. I and my brethren are here to support you and your people, especially amidst all the turmoils of the world. But we are few in number and must give mind to other issues which plague these lands. Very well, Cal says. But what are we going to do in this case? At this rate, there won't be any food left by spring. We have enough supplies for a long journey, my friends, Gath says, but those will dry up if we have to suffer many more of these orcish raids. That is why, Arondir says, I propose a twofold solution. There is a settlement of the Westmen north of here called Pelargir. Many of your people may be able to reside there. The rest will have to journey further up the river to the mountains we call Eminarnen. There is a sizable fortress there which will easily serve as a fortified holding from which we can maintain control of the river in conjunction with these Westmen. From there we can plan on how best to move forward. After a few moments of consideration, most of the noblemen agree to the plan, though one of them, who is lord over many of the farmers along the river, suggests that he and his people move further west. The others agree to this concession, and they begin preparations for moving out of the town. By night, it seems that everyone is ready to leave, and as they exit the town, the camera pans up and begins to move over the mountains of Efelduath, and we gradually see gathering tribes of orcs and men, though still largely separated. And we see the beginnings of a great black tower being constructed towards the north of a large mountain. We pan in towards the tower and see that there is something of a throne room with many dark, ominous, and black-cloaked men surrounding a single man kneeling before a throne. So you failed to catch him, a voice coming from the throne says. Lord Father, you gave me but 2 small tribes of those orc weaklings. You cannot expect me to resolve this issue without something more substantial. Do not insult my orcs, Khamul. The camera begins to look away from Khamul and looks towards the throne, and there we see what appears to be a man playing with a knife on the table. What you mean to say is that you let my plan be spoiled by a small group of men and elves. I even heard that you let the halfling archers tear my orcs to pieces. Khamul cringes at the mention of the halflings. Ah, yes, I know all about that. Did you not think that I would at least watch you on this mission? That elf could very well jeopardize our master's plans, and you failed to stop him. Perhaps I should entrust this task to someone else more suitable. Enough, Khamul shouts as he stands up. You may be the head of this council, but you are not my master. I will kill this elf and you will know your place in the new world. He then storms out of the room with several human guards who are clearly loyal to him in particular. The elf on the throne slams his knife into the arm of the chair and stands. Very well, Khamul. I'll let you play your game with your forces. But I will be the one who finishes the true task. And as he says this, he looks towards the mountain to the south. We then cut to Celebrimbor leading the rest of the elves and men into Ostendethil, and excusing himself to return to the Gwaithir Meridain, while Galadriel, Celeborn, Elrond, and Verrix go to the palace. There they find Celebrian, who has been managing the kingdom in the absence of her father and mother. Elrond is seen watching Celebrian before she notices. He gets a hold of himself and bows courteously, thanking Celeborn and Galadriel for their company and asking permission to speak with the guilds of their realm. Galadriel graciously grants it, leading him to the Gwaithir Meridain. Meanwhile, Celeborn goes with Celebrian to spend some time with her and to discuss what has happened since their departure. After talking about some of the daily concerns which had been brought to her, Celeborn notices that she seems to be disguising something and begins questioning her to discover what she's hiding. Verrix is shown to his rooms and is told by Galadriel that they will begin lessons for his people within a few weeks. In our next scene, we get an overview of the men, elves, and Harfoots departing from their towns and beginning to move up the Anduin. It becomes clear that the Harfoots are much more prepared for leaving and settling in other places, but many, including Marigold, are still sad to leave. With a short montage, we see them moving up the Anduin, with the implication that several days or even weeks have passed until the elves and men make their way into the fortress, while the Harfoots and Glorfindel continue up the Anduin. Many of the farmers and workers begin to occupy the surrounding lands, believing this to be their new home, while the soldiers immediately search the fortress to discover its secrets. They find a few tunnels which they block off or fill, and begin mending some of the defenses, especially the outer walls, all while food and other supplies begin to stockpile. Eregion is watching and directing the entire operation with a look of thoughtful worry when one of his scouts approaches him, telling him that they have found the armory. They go and find a building within the inner walls, which is filled to bursting with armors and weapons of various types and sizes. Among the various weapons is a black sword with an onyx stone set within the hilt so large that it bulges out of both sides. Eregion looks upon the weapon with horror. This device has seen to the death of many. What is it? Estior asks. Eregion raises his hand towards the sword but recoils as it nears the blade. He looks down and turns to Estior, his horror still constant, and says, "You have lived no more than 30 years in these southern lands. What do you know about them?" "I know the trees and hills as well as any elf, sir, and I know the names of the men in these lands by heart." "And what of before we elves came to assist the men of this region?" "Of that I know little." Eregion nods. "And you are likely better for it. For I have been in this land for nearly 1,000 years, before any great host of elves came over the mountains and settled in the forest to the north. I've seen petty kingdoms rise and fall, tribes of men from every land squabbling for power. Among them was a dark tribe, whose name even I know not. They were small and weak as far as tribes go, but they had no qualms with seeking power from darker elements. They consigned themselves to dark spirits with whom it is said not even the great enemy himself would parley. From them they gained knowledge of how to forge weapons of dread, which would cause the earth to quake, storms to gather, and mountains to burst." Estior shudders at this news, but Eregion continues, "What's worse, these weapons exacted a heavy price for their use. Power must come from somewhere, and if it be not in the knowledge or skill of the wielder, as is often the case with such dark arts, it must be drawn from life itself." Estior's eyes widen. "You don't mean..." Eregion nods. "That is the purpose of this blade." Eregion shakes his head and once more turns towards the sword. "We must lock it up and keep it secret, for I dread to imagine the horrors that could be revived in this land if it fell into the wrong hands." In our next scene, Galadriel and Elrond are going to the Gwaithir Meridain after having formulated a plan for experimenting with arts, which will hopefully reduce the decay of the earth. They enter, and we see in a panning shot the brilliance of the elven crafts which have been stockpiled and stored in the guild. Eventually the camera rests on Celebrimbor, who is at work amongst his fellow smiths and is concentrating greatly on some fine plan. Galadriel calls to him, which snaps him out of his trance, and he presents himself to the two of them with a bow. "My lord Elrond and my lady Galadriel, what can I do for you?" It is clear from his voice that he is brimming over with excitement, though certainly not from the presence of his guests. "Celebrimbor," Galadriel says, "I'm afraid we did not have the chance to speak about this while we were on the road, but our dear friend Elrond bears a message from the High King." "Message?" "Indeed," Elrond says. "I am afraid that I have ill news which we must discuss at length. for the beauty and life of the world has begun to fade. Celebrimbor has no response, as if he were expecting some other comment from Elrond to punctuate his declaration. Seeing this, Elrond continues. The High King, knowing that the greatest elven smiths of the Noldor may be able to alleviate this decay, has requested your aid in the creation of new devices to preserve the beauty of the world. As he goes on with the proposal, Galadriel notices that Celebrimbor is becoming bored and even impatient. I would have thought, she says, that you would be honored to receive such an offer from the High King. Horror at the realization that he has been disrespectful flashes across Celebrimbor's face, and he profusely apologizes to Elrond for his inattentiveness. Please, forgive me, my lord Elrond. I did not wish to offend. It is only that I have already received such news that we have already been at work to alleviate these problems for several days now. Indeed, Galadriel says. Tell me, who gave you this news and this commission? Would you like to meet him, my lady? He is working among us at this moment. Celebrimbor then leads the three of them to one of the forges, where we see Elendil, the messenger of the Valar, overseeing one of the projects wherein a lesser ring of power is being forged. And for our final scene, we have Eregion looking over the layout of the fortress, the surrounding lands, and the reports from scouts. His thoughts are interrupted by a messenger who says that a small band of orcs with an elf at their head is coming to the fortress. Eregion grabs his gear and gathers a few of his guards, while some of the lords of the men who also occupy the forest join him as they go to the main gate of the fortress to meet this strange group. When they arrive, they find that it was just as the scout described. An elf with about 7 orcs, all of whom have swords, maces, or daggers, have approached the gate bearing a token of negotiation. Who are you, and what is it you want from us? Eregion says. I am called Adar, the elf says, and these are my friends. The orcs chuckle at the comment. Elves have no friendship with the corrupted race, Eregion says. Oh, I disagree. We shall all have to be friends eventually, and I assure you these fine lads mean you no harm. Again, the orcs laugh at the comment. What is your business here? Lord Gath demands of them. Only this, that these lands, and this fortress in particular, belong to me and mine, and you are therefore trespassing upon it. I bid you leave these lands and return any devices you may have uncovered here, and I will leave you at liberty to go to whatever land will take you. If this is meant to be your fortress, I'd like to know why it was abandoned before we arrived, says Lord Kalt. Peace, Eregion says. What if we do not comply? Oh, that's simple, Adar replies. If you do not leave this fortress within a fortnight, I shall just simply assault it with my whole host of orcs. Once we break through, we will be sure to kill all of you for your impudence. As I'm sure you know, my friends have no qualms about the slaughter of women and children. What proof do you have, says Lord Cath, that your force will be strong enough to break through this fortress? Adar smiles and says, a wonderful question indeed. I suppose we shall have to find out whether it can. But remember, you are the ones bargaining with the lives of your people. With that, he turns and goes back into the forest. The camera begins to zoom in on Eregion, whose hard face masks the worry he is feeling. Lord Gath shakes his head and sighs with exasperation, commenting on how removing themselves from this land already may be too much for their people to take. Sir, what would you have us do? Eregion closes his eyes before turning to look at the others. Prepare for a siege.